Speakers, Tom Stahl and Beth Dunford, can you please join me on stage here? So Tom and Beth are no strangers to resilience. In fact, both of them have been heavily involved in elevating resilience within USAID. Tom was mission director in Ethiopia in 2011-2012 when we really started to commit long-term development resources throughout the Horn to building resilience to recurrent crisis. At that time, Beth was actually based here in Washington and helped lead the charge in pushing resilience from this side. So it's great to have both of you here. Welcome. First, some introductions. Tom has a distinguished career in international development, the bulk of it spent overseas in the Middle East and East Africa. Among his various assignments, as I said, he served as USAID Mission Director for Ethiopia, before, during, and after the 2011-2012 drought emergency that really propelled resilience to the fore as a development priority within USAID. Tom has also served as the head of our Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance Bureau, and in that role served as a co-chair for our agency's Resilience Leadership Council. Tom now works as the USAID counselor in our front office of the new administrator, Mark Green. Joining Tom is Beth Dunford. Beth is the assistant to the administrator for USAID's Bureau for Food Security, as well as the deputy coordinator for development for Feed the Future, the U.S. government's global hunger and food security initiative. Beth also serves as the co-chair of the Resilience Leadership Council. So Beth has a few jobs. She too has had a distinguished career, including serving as mission director in Nepal during a massive earthquake where she oversaw USAID's recovery and reconstruction effort. During the 2011-2012 drought crisis in the Horn of Africa, followed on the heels of that by a drought crisis in the Sahel. As I said, Beth helped launch and lead the USAID's efforts to build resilience to recurrent crisis through her role as the Bureau for Food Security's Deputy Assistant Administrator. And like Tom, Beth also served in Ethiopia earlier in her career. So thank you both for your leadership on resilience, for making sure that a good idea has matured. And with that, I would pass it over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thanks to the Center for Resilience for organizing this event. Very timely, very important. It's great to see a good crowd here of government, multilateral, NGO, private sector, what was the other group? The universities and think tanks. It's great to see that because that's what's important, really getting everybody working together, talking to each other, sharing. And I'm really glad we're focusing on the evidence. That's so important. As Greg mentioned, I was the USAID director in Ethiopia during the 2011 famine, but that wasn't the start of my sort of focus on this area. I actually started my career in humanitarian assistance and development with the Horn of Africa famine in the mid-'80s. Went out to Sudan and worked there, and then spent 15 years in the Horn of Africa at one time or another, and saw these recurrent droughts and other disasters going on there. And always thought about, we need to think much more broadly about this, but it didn't gel in my mind until that fateful drought in 2010 and 11, 25 years after I had initially gone out there. And that really spurred us, other donors, NGOs, everybody focusing on this, really to think, more broadly and think about resilience. And it wasn't starting from scratch. I think that's important to understand that over the years, starting back in the mid-'80s and into the early '90s, we had developed many other things that helped start to sort of build the framework for resilience, starting with early warning systems, FuseNet, okay, the Productive Safety Net program in the early 2000s was very important. The food security reserves in several countries, a kind of a whole humanitarian assistance infrastructure, household income mapping, obviously training and capacity building with local government. So I think all those sort of building steps really helped us. But 2011 was a tipping point, and we said, we're not really addressing the core yet. And we saw the cost of treating droughts as though they were anomalies. And I think it first really started to hit us. You know, it's not just that it's an anomaly and you have to provide humanitarian assistance. We need to be thinking about development in the context of recurrent shocks. In the case of, you know, the Horn of Africa, it's drought. In Nepal, it's earthquakes. In another place, it's floods or whatever. And that it really started to click in our mind and say, you know, we really ought to be doing development in the context of these recurrent droughts, not just in terms of how do we move ahead with education, agriculture, whatever, but how do we incorporate the you know, knowledge, the certainty that there is going to be another shock and deal with that. Otherwise, we're going to see the cost of treating these droughts, you know, go up and continue. And the costs include, obviously, the loss of livelihoods and lives, the cost to the national regional economies, this unsustainable cost of going back to the same places every few years to respond. And that's to say nothing of the sort of impact on our development programs, which keep getting set back. And you have to start over or you know, start from you know, further back. So in response to these, as you know, USAID began prioritizing investments in resilience. We began working to expand capacity, the ability of people, of communities, of governments to manage adversity and change without compromising their future well-being and the existing development programs. And we embarked on a new approach that required humanitarian and development teams to work together on strategies to address the underlying causes of these recurrent crises. And that, of course, required making long-term investments in people and places subject to these crises. In the years since, we've seen a lot of progress. And I think, you know, just the last year and the year before, when we had a major drought again in the Horn, and you did not see the huge loss of life, the setback in household economies in the areas we've been working. So that's great. But now we really need to sort of focus in on not only doing it better, but how do we, you know what's going on and what's working and what isn't working. So building an evidence base. I think we've got some of that, but how do we take it to the next level? In Ethiopia, the government and partners effectively managed the drought through a combination of long-term investments. And a good example of this is the productive safety net. And not only that it continued, but that it was able to expand and be used during that drought period to reach an additional 2 million people beyond its core caseload. And this has been, the work that we've been doing now is teaching us important lessons, and that's what we're here today and tomorrow to discuss. We want to sustain the momentum and the investments, and we want to learn from what we're doing. Ambassador Mark Green, our new USAID administrator, his very first trip overseas, literally in less than a month of when he took office, was to the Horn of Africa. And he specifically in Ethiopia went out to the Somali region to look at the resilience work we had been doing there and get a better understanding of that. So he really understands and wants to focus on the work that we're doing. And, you know, so I think it's great that we're all here today. And one thing that's very clear is that the evidence generated by the work you're all doing has played a central role in the evolution of the thinking that we are all, you know, focused on, and will continue to be a driving force behind our collective efforts to build resilience to recurrent humanitarian crises. Current global crises only serve to reinforce the need for evidence-based investments in resilience. And of course, we need to take it beyond just resilience to drought or floods or even agriculture. Maybe how do we start thinking beyond that, not only in rural areas, but in urban areas as well. And so, on behalf of Ambassador Mark Green and myself, I hope you have a wonderful conference. I'll try to stay here for as much of it as I can, and that the lessons learned from this evidence exchange that we're going to be having will have broad impacts long into the future. Thank you very much. Turn it over to Beth. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Tom, for your leadership and resilience. And I'd also really like to thank our Center for Resilience Director Greg Collins and his team for organizing the summit at such an important time. I'm really excited to learn for the next couple of days, as I know all of you are. I'm going to talk about three main things today. First is that resilience has really been elevated as part of the next phase of Feed the Future. Second, the reason resilience is receiving this much attention and this much elevation is really due to the evidence that has proven how important it is and how effective it is. And third, that it's not just a U.S. government priority, that it's a priority of partner governments and other donors going forward. So first, to talk about resilience as a priority, I think Tom already mentioned that the very first trip that Ambassador Green took was to look at resilience. And I was able to accompany him on this trip where we went to the Somali region and we were able to see a suite of interventions that really comprise what sort of a broad resilience program can do for people. And it was really an important moment to show what was happening on the ground. I mean, for me, having served in Ethiopia 2002, 2003 during a very, very big drought, to see what was on the ground was truly amazing. Right now, things are very, very difficult for people in the Somali region of Ethiopia. But, you know, having been there 15 years before where there was no response system, very little on the ground, you really, really saw the difference. You saw really the ability to engage people in private sector activities, really connect pastoralists to markets so they can connect to the international livestock market. These are game-changing interventions that really provide some place for these pastoralists to go, moving up in their livelihoods journey. So I think Ambassador Green was very, very taken by this, which is very, very exciting for us with our new leader going forward. Also, this is a year old now, but the Global Food Security Act passed last year in July. We completed the Global Food Security Strategy. And what's important about that, a lot of things, but especially that we elevated resilience as a development objective, just showing along with inclusive ag-led growth and nutrition, we feel that resilience is equally important. They're all very interconnected, but we wanted to make sure that that our work on the ground focused on resilience going forward. So again, this has got to be a part of what we do, especially in areas where of recurrent crisis. You know, these areas, northern Kenya, Niger, northern Mali, Karamoja, in Uganda, Ethiopia. We have to make sure that we have interventions that are focused on these areas of recurrent crisis. But it also can be it is broader than that in areas like Bangladesh and Nepal, where folks are living very, very close to the poverty line. And so really want to dig into more about how we can further integrate resilience into everything that we do. And as I mentioned earlier, really the evidence has been so critical to really elevating the agenda of resilience. Really being able to go to our leaders, to Capitol Hill, to our partners at F and OMB and say, when you invest in places like Somali region, Ethiopia, have a sustained and comprehensive resilience package over many years. You can see in a drought like 2016, an El Nino shock, families that are in communities that are receiving these interventions are able to really withstand this quite severe shock, whereas families outside are not, seeing a 30% precipitous decline in their food security status. So that's real data to show the power of resilience interventions and in areas of recurrent crisis. Also data around cost savings, showing that you can invest $1 now will save you 2.9 later on. This comes from a study from DFID in Kenya and Ethiopia. This is the kind of data that our appropriators, our budget folks, our leaders want to see as we're moving forward. So just really want to emphasize the facts, figures, data, results that are coming out of all of the work you're doing are being noticed by the leaders in the U.S. government, and we're pushing that out through our programming. Just also want to mention some of the work was from Tango, Cornell and UC Davis work on livestock insurance also really demonstrates the potential of some really innovative tools moving forward. Let's see here. So in addition to the evidence which you're going to be gaining today, I think that, of course, I'm focused on the leadership in the U.S. government on resilience, taking it forward. But for this effort to be successful, we really rely on your partnership and the leadership and all of the work that you all are doing across different donor governments, across our partner governments in the field, NGOs, and civil society, international organizations. So I just really appreciate the fact that this is a global effort that we are all taking forward together. So I think that it's also, I focus mainly on food security, given that's my hat. It's a pretty multi-sectoral intervention to begin with, but really it's got to be beyond that. It's got to be in core health interventions, democracy and governance interventions, and it's got to be many, many partner governments coming, partners coming together on the field. So we're especially pleased to have colleagues from the World Bank, DFID, EU, to share their views on the importance of resilience and resilience evidence, and also the importance really of collective action for resilience. Equally pleased to have here Mr. Buawa from SILS Agromet and Dr. Ayan Mohammed from EGAD to provide regional institution perspectives. I want to recognize also the government of Kenya, whose representatives cannot be here today, but whose ending drought emergency strategy is a model of a forward-leaning, country-led resilience effort. And so no doubt our colleagues here from USAID Kenya can really help highlight and elevate those efforts as well. So there's a lot today we can learn from each other, and I'm so pleased that you all gathered here to really do just that. So in conclusion, I want to echo Tom in really wishing you success over the next couple of days. I'm really excited to hear what comes out of all of these sessions. And we do really view this event as a seminal moment in our journey on resilience, coming 5 years after we collectively committed to do our part on resilience and to elevate it and move it out through our programming. And so it's a moment that offers us a unique opportunity to reflect on the growing body of evidence on resilience and chart a collective vision for how we are going to take this work forward. So I look forward to hearing the results of your discussions over the next few days, and thank you.
Thank you, Beth and Tom. I appreciate it.